Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and joining me today from fair Cape Town is Mr. Michael Morris. What is your title, actually, Michael? It's editor of the Daily Friend, or editor-in-chief?
Yeah, editor of Daily Friend, head of media at the IRR. Either of those is good, or combined.
No, very good. Always to have you on the show. And of course, we also have the head of campaigns for the IRR, Mr. Gabriel Crouse. Gabriel, how are you doing?
I'm all right. Busy day. A lot of things going on that make me worried.
Yes, well,
yeah.
Speaking of total catastrophic constitutional crises, let us dive into it. So yesterday we saw Minister Dlamini Zuma, who is the Minister of Cooperative Government and Traditional Affairs, who during the lockdown, people joked was the real president of the country based off of the lists of regulations she was putting out. Well, she has declared that the election will be held on the 27th of October. She has proclaimed it, I think is the word they use in the legal process. And so, Gabriel, is that it? Is the story over? Are we now getting the election that we've been demanding? What's going on here?
Your vote is being stolen, Nicholas Lorimer. Your vote is being stolen, Michael Morris. My own vote is being stolen, and everyone who's listening to this, assuming they're in South Africa, their vote is being stolen too. I hear you on some people thinking that this means, oh, no, it's fine. Last night, someone in my family, very well informed, watched SABC News and sent me a message saying, oh, goody, the election's going to go ahead. Dlamini Zuma just said so. But you've got to look a little bit further. The IEC has long maintained that an election cannot be proclaimed until voter registration is complete. Now, I don't have the voter registration numbers for municipal elections, but I just looked up the numbers for national elections. So before the 2019 national election, before the 2014 national election, a couple of months before that, you have an in-person voter registration weekend. Everyone who's not yet registered,
usually two of them,
can go and do it. And in the 2014 one, they racked up 2 million new registrations.
Sure.
In the 2018, 2019 one, it was like 700,000 and a bit more the second time. So millions again, if you add them together. So it's a lot of people who come and register. In addition, for the municipal elections, you have to vote where you live, technically. And people have been known to move. So if you've moved, then you have to change your residency address in your registration. The IEC said, don't worry, we're going to do that on the 15th of July, 16th of July. Then they said, no, don't worry, we're going to do it in the end of July. And then they said, well, we're going to do it at some point, but we don't know when. And then Dlamini Zuma said, too late, because now the thing has been proclaimed. So now there's a whole new argument for why the elections cannot happen in October this year. And that is that a lot of people, maybe even millions of people, haven't had a chance to register to vote. And if you don't allow people to register to vote, then you really are breaking the Constitution. Section 1, the first chapter, the first part of the Constitution says, South Africa is one sovereign country, ... and it guarantees universal suffrage, a common voter's roll, and regular elections. So the regular elections bit, the IEC wants to break it. The universal suffrage and common voters' roll, Dlamini Zuma wants to break that. And that means together they can go to the Constitutional Court and say, look, you need to postpone the elections, partly because of COVID, on the basis of ignoring the science. We've already discussed how bad the IEC report is on the science. But even if you find that we can go ahead, despite COVID, you still have to cancel the thing because we kind of forgot to let people to register to vote. Now, if you think that this is not deliberate, you should at least consider the fact that the IEC was advised by independent medical experts that one thing that can help is to spread the elections over multiple days. Instead of getting everyone to queue up on the same day, you can split it over multiple days. Now that the election's been proclaimed, that can't happen. Does that sound like they're doing their best, their damnedest, to make this thing work unless the Constitutional Court tells them otherwise? Another point to note is that the IEC said its minimum election timetable might be 82 days. It could be even less. They weren't asked to give a complete minimum, but they said 82 days could be doable. Now, November 1st is the deadline. If you count back 82 days from that, that means deep into next week, they could have proclaimed the election and still stuck to the timetable. And that would mean that they would proclaim the election at least after they've gone to court and after the IEC had been forced to submit all kinds of documents to show their position. That hasn't happened. Why does that matter? Well, if the IEC had submitted that the minimum it can do is 82 days, then friends of the court might have pointed out that it doesn't take 82 days between proclamation and election, because there's a whole bunch of steps that you can do much shorter. If you look at the timetable, most of it's about things like when the political parties have to nominate their candidates and when the candidates have to be counted at the same time, checking up things on the voters' roll, and every item gets its own day or its own couple of days. When in fact, you can do a lot of those things on the same days. So you could shrink this thing down maybe to 30 days. Then the election could be proclaimed in September. We vote at the end of October, maybe over 3 days, October 30, 31st, 1st of November. And then everyone's worries about the virus would be radically reduced. The voter registration weekend could be split over 2 weekends, which the IEC recommended, but now it can't do. In other words, there's just a lot of ways that the IEC and the minister could have acted to try and make this thing work. But instead, what they've done is do everything they can to make sure that it doesn't work. And so blatant is their inability to even pretend that they care about respecting the Constitution, that they've said to the Constitutional Court, the IEC has announced that its appeal to the court will be firstly to break the constitutional deadline in 159, which is a very clear as day kind of order from the Constitution that you have to have the election by 1 November. They said, look, if you can't break the Constitution, then our secondary relief will be to say, please tell us that what we're doing is illegal, but only tell us that after it's already been done. Your vote is being stolen in broad daylight, and the people that are doing it aren't even pretending that this isn't illegal.
Right. It really seems like I think as one of our colleagues put it as sort of a bomb has been handed to the court, and they've been left with almost no other option to rule against this. So they're going to have to be very forthright to strike it down. Michael, you are muted, but your thoughts on this crisis, quite frankly, and yet another one. So we had a law and order crisis, we had a rule of law crisis, and now we've got a electoral crisis.
Absolutely, and just looking at the timeline, it brings out just how shocking the position is that the Gabriel set out. Ramaphosa announced the date on the 27th of April, so there's been plenty of time. He even said at the time that while he understood the country was in the middle of fighting the COVID-19 pandemic, life must not come to a standstill. And we were then encouraged on the 9th of June, when the IEC very boldly announced that it was ready for local elections. Technically ready, it said. Glenn Mashinini made the announcement during the official launch of the 2021 municipal elections on Wednesday, on Wednesday, June the 9th. And he then sets out all the details of what we were then led to believe was a preparation for the election that was meant to be had on the 27th of October. And then, of course, I mean, the thing that I keeps striking me and to underline is that we're looking at electing local government that a Sunday Times report on the 4th of July pointed out that the current local government administration, now in its 5th year, has been the worst on record. And if you look at in that month, just last month, Tsekani Mululeka's the Auditor General's report on local government, we get some idea of just how critical it is at this point to call our local councillors to account. Only 27 out of 257 municipalities obtained clean audits. 109 couldn't properly account for how they spent taxpayers' money. 25 either missed the deadline to submit their financials or didn't even bother handling them at all. So we get this very clear sense of the urgency of, in fact, calling this level of our political life to account, this level of political governance. And it's just mind-boggling that this sense of urgency and the importance of this moment is being so lightly treated by the IEC.
No, exactly. It raises the hackles on the back of one's neck. So, Gabriel, there's some questions in the chat here that perhaps you can answer. The first one is, and I think you've sort of answered this already, genuine question, how concerned should we be?
So I think it's really hard to overstate how dangerous this is. And that is because from a scientific perspective, all of the most credible scientists that I know say that COVID-19 is not going to go away. So the argument being made by the IEC is basically, as long as there's some COVID, as long as there's room for more vaccination, to quote it, it says, it will always be safer and better, end quote, to wait for more vaccinations. 55% of this country, according to Afrobarometer, doesn't want to get vaccinated. So it will always be better and safer to not have an election. That's the scientific, so-called scientific argument side of the IEC's claim. So that's no good. If you postpone this thing once, you can postpone it again and again and again. Well, then people will say, from a legal point of view, aren't they asking the Constitutional Court to say this thing must be done by February? They're also saying that they want the Constitutional Court to take a supervisory role in which they're updated on a regular basis and so can change their instructions on a regular basis. So here's how it works. You get the Constitutional Court to take a supervisory role if you can convince it on a COVID-19 basis that you can postpone the election. Then the first time, then you'll be able to say, look, the vaccine numbers aren't working out. Look, we've had very low vaccinations for the last little while. Look, there's a new variant on the horizon. Look, it's December holiday, so people are traveling around, so there's increased spread. Look, we're seeing some increased cases in Gauteng or Limpopo, or wherever it is next time. Let's hold off on the elections again. And the Concord can do that. If it can do it once, it can do it again and again. So that's really bad. The final, I mean, there's lots of ways to go down the line, but you know, something that's very important to note in the timeline is that the IEC was fully committed to going ahead with this thing, and then something changed. What was that? The mid-July riots. And what were they all about? It was about a constitutional delinquent, former president, telling the court that he doesn't believe the court has any authority to tell him to go and speak to the Zondo Commission, doesn't have any authority to compel him one way or another. Then when they said, well, we're going to arrest you, he said, no, you can't arrest me. Then when he finally went to jail, his supporters said this is an apartheid. He said it's an apartheid type thing. His supporters said it's white monopoly capital. They said all kinds of things. And then we had a week of wanton destruction, looting and violence. Over 300 lives lost. And that kind of triggered a little bit of a wake-up call, I think, in a lot of people's minds. Political insiders that we've spoken to have said the ANC's figures are looking, for the first time since 2017, below 50%. That is a huge psychological problem. That's a watershed. The ANC's strongest argument has always been, we might not deliver services, we might be full of corrupt people, but there is no real alternative. You can't imagine an alternative. As Jacob Zuma said, we're going to rule until Jesus comes. If the ANC drops below 50% in the municipal elections in 2021, on the back of a very hard 2020, 1.4 million jobs wiped out, and then a spectacular 2021 winter, where these riots kind of made people connect the dots between their livelihoods and the nature of government, then its prospects for 2024 seriously alter. So the ANC must be very worried about facing an election this year. And just think, if you're worried about that, and then the message comes through, look, the Constitution says you have to have the elections this year. That's based on a law, a constitutional amendment signed in by Nelson Mandela in 1998, passed by a 3/4 majority. The liberation movement itself set up this rule. And now the liberation movement is going to break this rule because it's not convenient. What kind of lesson does that send? And where have we heard it all before? I would recommend to you that you study the history of any liberation movement that has broken its own laws on elections and find me one example where it hasn't led to the outright collapse of the country. If you can find me one example, then I'll feel slightly better.
So, Gabriel, second question. Oh, that was quite a lengthy one. Someone asks, I thought people have been able to register online.
Yeah, they have, but not many have. About 17,000 did. And look, in this country, not everyone has the internet. I think internet figures are 55, 60%. So the argument's going to be strong from the other side to say, look, and I'll make this argument too. If someone's been denied the right to vote because they've been misled by the IEC into believing they can do an in-person registration on the weekend before the proclamation, and then no such opportunity is afforded, then that person's right to vote has been denied. And I'm not here to... we need to defend everyone's right to vote. This is a very serious thing. So just to say one final thing about that, that doesn't mean this can't go through in October. It just means to do that, the court is going to have to order a remedy. And I think on the basis of precedent we've seen, especially 1994, the court might order that that registration can take place after proclamation, that you can have a voter registration weekend somewhere in September.
Right. So
But-
I'll
Yeah.
come to you, Michael, for the final thought in a minute. But one last question, Gabriel. Someone asks, is it possible for the Constitutional Court to rule against what the Constitution says about the election? If it does, what would this mean? So I guess you kind of answered some of it there, but can the Constitutional Court just sort of say, oh, well, this whole Constitution thing, it's more of a guideline?
Yeah, so there's one way to... So I don't think it can do that legally, but I don't know. And it's important to remember that two conflicting facts. The one is that the court is just a bunch of people who can do anything that a person can do. I mean, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma just did something completely insane. The IEC is acting in complete dereliction of its duty. If you'd asked me, can they do that a year ago? Well, honestly, I would have said yes, because I've got rather a cynical view. But I think most people would say no. But people can do anything. Can they do it within the confines of the law? Absolutely not. The Constitution is supreme. The argument that the election is a nullity depends on facts which do not bear on this case. So I think that the argument to be made before the Constitutional Court, and I can assure you, good people will be making this argument, that the court must find that the election cannot be postponed, and that it can practically be achieved through remedy. I think that argument is tight, and it should be a winning one, but it's going to take some doing to jump through all of the hoops and break through all the shackles that are being imposed by this recalcitrant state apparatus that's trying to steal your vote.
So, Michael, last question to you, just sort of generally, if you have anything to add. And secondly, another reason for why I've heard the ruling party might want to postpone elections is that they have not done proper candidate selection. ANC selection of candidates is always a very traumatic affair for the country. You will notice that the number of service delivery protests, often connected to the wrong candidate in a certain area being selected, goes up every single election cycle, particularly in municipal government elections when there's all these councillors who need to be chosen. So what do you make of the politics of this? I think if the election is held now, the ANC is actually going to have a big problem on its hands for themselves, not just because the country is upset due to the riots, but also because they're just not ready.
Yeah, interesting point. And clearly they would feel very vulnerable in their circumstances. I mean, one final thing that often strikes me is the absence of popular outrage, and the people just not realizing that with things being so bad, having the vote is actually the real source of power. People really do have the power to change the way they live their lives, and the way services are delivered, the way their towns and cities are run. And considering that some 40% of the population live in the 8 metropolitan areas, obviously, and the urbanization rate, I think, is about 65%. So it's in towns and cities where the nature of life, the quality of life is really determined but the power is actually in the hands of people, and one would hope that there'd be a kind of rising outrage at any effort to postpone the opportunity to hold these politicians to account.
Exactly. Right. So, of course, this is something that we will continue to be making a noise about, and you will hear more from us, and we will update you as things happen, because it is a really big deal, to put it bluntly.
Yeah.
But let us go to something that's not as big a deal, but still kind of interesting, which is a fairly small story about, at least a story I didn't notice at first until Michael brought my attention to it. And this is about a gender activist, Mbuyiselo Botha, who is a member of the Gender Commission. Well, a voice note purporting to be of his voice having a conversation came out recently, where he referred to another member of the committee of the Commission for Gender Equality as, quote, this albino. He was speaking supposedly about Nomasonto Mazibuko, who is an albino woman. He has since said that he apologizes for these comments and that they were in bad taste and out of character for him, but that he's not going to resign because he needs a process of he wants due process to be followed. So he's not going to jump the gun. Michael, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I suppose a couple of thoughts. I mean, in a sense, perhaps he's quite right. We're all very much in favor of due process. Just one immediate thought that comes to mind is that if the issue here had been a question of race, if he had happened to be white and he was referring to a fellow commissioner as this black, I think the response to the story would have been very different, and that's an indication of a particular South African pathology, I suppose, that we become obsessed about who's saying what and what that means. It's assigning different meaning to the same kind of purported insult, if you like. But I suppose the other thing is that our fixation with these things also has the effect, perhaps, of obscuring what the real issue is. We haven't yet learned what it was that Botha was particularly riled about or vexed about, and perhaps that's not going to feature at all. We get to obsess about the slight that he delivered. So yeah, I mean, all kinds of very particular South African pathologies, I think, at work here. Yeah,
no, that's exactly right.
Yeah, including Nicholas being a bit naughty and is purported to supposedly said, once the man has apologized for saying what he said on the voice note, you don't have to caveat in that way.
I'm a diplomatic person, Gabriel. Forgive me.
You must just tell us like it is. I just want to point out a linguistic point, which is that, I mean, so there was this, if you were in a room and someone said, who's got that car, the Mercedes, it's parked in the way of the driveway, I'm trying to get out. And you said, oh, and you don't know anyone's names, and you say, it's the albino over there, or it's the white dude, or it's the black lady. When that's the only person who matches that description, then that's perfectly reasonable. There was a case where there was a bit of a football scandal where someone had said to the referee, was trying to point out someone on the other side of the field, and there was only one black dude in the field, off the field or whatever. And he was like, no, it was the black guy. Then he was charged with racism. So this is not one of those cases, but it's a curious fact of language that this albino itself doesn't give you all the context. The context is given by the irate nature of what he was saying and the fact that he meant to say it as an insult in the context it was placed in. But the further context is, well, why were they so angry with each other? And I haven't been able to establish that, and I wonder if you ever will, which just echoes Michael's points.
Yeah, it's quite interesting to see such a vicious level of infighting inside a commission who, I mean, we know, I think, what the Gender Equality Commission is supposed to do. It's supposed to ensure gender equality, but as to what it actually does, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe I'm just expressing my own ignorance here. But Michael, any final thoughts on this?
Yeah, and I think Gabriel's final point is absolutely right. You know, we get to have this furious debate about something that we perhaps don't know the full facts of, and I think that's absolutely critical. I mean, we're so fond of that as South Africans, as leaping to conclusions and deciding the outcome of things before really establishing what the actual facts are, who said what, and what it was all about. But yeah, I'm sure we're not going to be given any clearer picture of what the Gender Commission is all about through
It's putting it mildly.
Yeah.
I apologize for some of the background noise. I was typing there without muting my microphone, and Michael's clicking a pen. Sorry, we are working from home. No worries about that. Let us move on to our final story for today. And that is the case of the amazing disappearing deputy president. So David Mabuza, who is, of course, our deputy president, former premier of Mpumalanga, has been out of the country in Russia receiving some sort of medical treatment since, I think, before the riots. So at least a month now.
More
And
than a month,
yeah, exactly. And it's not really clear when he's coming back or what's wrong with him, or, is he in very poor health? Is this some sort of routine thing? What's going on? The DA was curious about this, and it wanted to see what was going on. So it asked the government who had paid for the trip. And David Mabuza's office replied that, in fact, David Mabuza himself had paid for the trip. So it wasn't a use of taxpayer money, which is a good thing. But the DA then followed up to say, look, we still kind of want to know what's wrong with him, even though this is, generally speaking, unusual, because you're not supposed to have to publicly disclose anyone's medical conditions. But we think that it's in the country's interests because, of course, he is the deputy president. And if we want to know whether he's still able to do his constitutional duties. And this is, I think, something the government has refused so far. So, Gabriel, what do you make of this? It's a bit strange. Why Russia? And do you think this means anything?
I don't know. I like to remind people that Jacques Poe's book, The President's Keeper, is probably the most successful work of nonfiction in the last decade in South Africa. Starts out with a trip to Russia. And you think, this guy's finally figured out how Putin is, or the Kremlin are really what's running the show of state capture. Then it turns out, no, not really. It's a red herring. The guys running the show are pimps from Cape Town, cigarette smugglers, and the Gupta family and a couple of others. It's much more mundane than that. So I do think Russia is where people's minds kind of gravitate. There's a sort of magnetic pull to Russia, and conspiracy theories, and James Bond soundtracks start playing, and sneaky pens start turning into satellite operating devices. So I don't know. I think that Russia would be the perfect place for the deputy president to go and have a holiday for a month and then get everyone talking about him if he can't get attention any other way. That's the flippant side. The more serious side, I hope he's, I don't know. I don't know what his medical condition is. I feel that it feels kind of gross to demand to know whether someone has cancer or something. But yeah, given there is a public interest in knowing the health status, and this is a problem that countries have across the world a lot of the time, and generally the countries that are really well run have transparency about the health status of their senior officials.
Michael, in sort of 40 seconds or so, the take.
Yeah, I think Gabriel's absolutely right. I mean, it is tricky. One doesn't want undue invasion of privacy of anyone. But, considering that Mabuza's government projects include turning Eskom around and the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, I mean, those are particular issues he was charged with. So it's, it's no small matter. He's not just an MP. This is, the 2IC of the country, and I think the public needs to be informed and kept up to speed.
No. Tricky stuff. Anyway, I'm sure something will come out of that at some point, and hopefully the deputy president returns to us in good health. sometime in the near future. But anyway, that is all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for listening. We hope that you enjoy the show. If you want to support our work, our fight for the election stuff, all of these things, please.
Yeah, if you feel like voting.
Yes, if you kind of think that voting might be important, SMS your name to 32823 to become a friend of the IRR, fund us, and keep us in the fight in the public space on these issues. Also, if you want to just read our thoughts and opinions on stuff, get a bit of a different take on how things are going in South Africa, check out thedailyfriend.co.za. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful day, and cheerio. We'll see you tomorrow.